Welcome to Meet Me at the Wall. A podcast exploring author Anne Goodwin's time-traveling journey after discovering hundreds of letters written to her grandmother over a century ago. We visit the space where fact meets fiction, truth fosters imagination, and delve into the past while keeping an eye on how lessons from history affect us today and even tomorrow. Welcome. We are back at the wall here with Anne and Betsy.
Hey, Doug.
Hello.
Hello. And it's funny because last time I remember when we started, we were concerned about lawnmowers making a lot of noise in the background. Today we had the same thing going on all morning and they stopped right before you got here.
It's the magic of the letters.
It's so wonderful. I also remember last time we were going to pull a thread from last episode. What was that again?
We were. I had an assignment.
You did?
Yes.
And how was your homework?
It was interesting as usual.
Okay.
I think the best way for me to describe it is I had to make a note in my amazement journal after my visit back to the office. So I think if I'll just go ahead and sort of lay out what happened.
Sounds good.
All right.
Let's hear it.
So 10 May 2024. The letters worked their magic once again. I returned to the office after a lengthy hiatus to look for the proverbial needle in the haystack. Each podcast session, we like to pull a thread from the last chat into our new one. I was in search of some source material, specifically the letter Ben wrote Florence proclaiming he wanted to smoke so much he could howl. Unfortunately, I had no idea where I had placed that letter. One in over 100 letters Ben wrote during their engagement, and resigned myself just to start the task with a small pile. And then the magic happened. Who knew the thread we should pull was related to Betsy's tangent research on Irene Castle's bold new bob that set the country off on a new craze? I open a letter, and in the middle of the page, I read Ben admonishing Florence for desiring a bob haircut, disparaging women in general as sheep followers, and then goes on to mention Mrs. Vernon Castle and her publicity stunt that set the whole country a-Twitter. Real-time bob drama unfolding before me. Needless to say, I stopped my howl quest.
Oh, my goodness. So when you say Irene Castle...
This is the woman who Betsy described last session who started the bob craze.
Right.
She's the one who cut her hair. So I immediately called Betsy at 8:15 in the morning that morning and said, Betsy, what was the name of the person who got their hair bob cut? And she confirmed that it was Castle. So
The one and the same, Irene Castle, the famous ballroom dancer bobber.
Yes, and we've never noticed that in the letters, never came across that tidbit.
That little tidbit. And somehow last episode, Betsy gave us a really nice background on that. And then here it is, right in a letter from Ben.
Out of a pile of over 100 letters
that's great.
That just popped up. So the letters are doing their work and encouraging us to keep on keeping on, even if the task is daunting. It gave me a little gift. And if you'd like, what's interesting is the tone of this letter, and I'll share the actual comments that Ben wrote to Florence, kind of talks about women disparagingly. And it's sort of the time where she was asking him not to drink or smoke because he couldn't be civil towards her friends. Mm-hmm. I think the prominent attitude was men above and women below. And it's sort of indicated in this comment.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that letter.
All right.
Are you going to read the whole thing here?
Oh, no, I'm just going to read the part that's relevant. But this is interesting. It's Monday. That's what the letter says. They never date the letters.
Okay.
Because they're just moving back and forth so quickly. So it's Monday as opposed to Tuesday.
But this is before they got married?
Yes. This is an engagement
This is an engagement. Okay.
Yes, this is the pile of engagement letters.
All right.
That were written twice a day for months. So you are thinking of bobbing your hair again, are you? I wish you wouldn't, darling, and I don't think you would unless it was just after someone else did. If you thought it over, dearest, you never would. But women are sort of like a bunch of sheep. If one does something, the rest are never happy till they do it too. Mrs. Vernon Castle just did that to attract attention and get publicity, and now every girl in the country feels she must follow suit.
Oh, my goodness. That's a little harsh.
I know. And it's just such an interesting pop-up.
Well, and the phrase following sheep, I guess it's been around for a while.
It is. I love that thread. I don't love what it represents necessarily, but it certainly is an interesting thread about the times.
Yes, it totally reflects what Betsy was saying about it was a rebellious act.
Right.
Well, and men for the first time were experiencing this newfound independence of women.
They were becoming a little scared, I think.
I think so,
They're
too.
like, oh, what's this going to lead to?
Exactly.
Right.
You start with your hair, what's next?
Right.
Probably a hemline.
Which takes us back to the girls on the wall showing their knees.
Right.
The album art.
And the photograph was put in the yearbook with a big censor banner over their knees. So these girls are trying their hardest, and everyone's trying to kind of keep them down a little bit. But as we know, Fleur bobbed her hair.
We have evidence.
Point made.
That's right. Well, these letters you mentioned, there are a lot, like twice a day letters, even though they're not dated. There's a lot of letters pre-wedding. About how long transpired from their engagement to the wedding? Have you nailed that down?
They were engaged in August of 21, and they were married in September of 22.
Just a little over a year then.
Yeah, because first she had to end her other engagement.
Right.
Which took a while.
Oh,
yeah. And
Reggie was not happy.
No.
Yeah.
And she was at school.
And was she at school through the spring of 22 then?
She was.
Okay, so she kind of wrapped that up, though.
She wrapped that up.
So she was there in total a year and a half?
2 years.
2 years, okay. Did you find much in the letters that you two researched that sort of then leads up with wedding planning and things like that? Do we know much about the wedding, I guess, is what I'm driving at.
We know a lot about the wedding because there was a full-page wedding announcement, description.
And we have the beautiful photograph of the wedding party.
We have that, and also
descriptions of the dresses.
So we know exactly what it looked like. Everyone had a different shade of pink on. The reception was in the Westgate home. And there's a little stuff about that we can get in this week's reading that gives
later
a little more
in this episode,
yeah,
right?
It gives more description.
Back then, do you think a 1-year engagement was pretty typical?
If you remember mentioning Lily Maddox,
Yes.
she had lunch and then was married on Tuesday.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
Which happens today, too.
Right.
I mean, certainly.
Right. But it's all individual circumstances. For Lily, it was 2 days.
The kind of research that we did with the Meet Me at the Wall photograph of the women, we also had the wedding party photograph. So we were able to go through and match faces from the wall to the wedding photograph. And that was really fun.
Do you have any pictures of guests at the wedding then too, or is it more just the wedding party?
No, the wedding party, and then there's what do you call it? The book that people...
The wedding invitation book.
Yes.
Is a journal of the wedding. And it is literally, and we have it here and we'll have photographs of it.
Great.
But we need to find a decoder because it's all in code. So,
what do you mean code?
Well, a person's name would be there, and then there'd be an X and a check and a Y and a red, yellow, or red... mark regarding all the steps of the wedding. And we have no idea which sign indicates what. Did they come? Did they not come?
Oh, okay.
But one of the things we discovered was that Florence invited Reggie to the wedding.
She invited him? Okay.
And we think he came.
Ah,
He
interesting.
attended. But we need somebody to decode it because we can't figure out all what the marks mean.
This is fun investigative work.
It is.
How would you even figure out what those checks mean? It might be an individual thing, or do you think it was that era?
I think it was her own code, and I think it's a matter of just sitting with it and mulling it over and knowing who did come, because we have that list as well,
It's a
and
system.
cross-referencing.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's this beautiful old wedding invitations written on the front. It's basically an address book.
And how many did she invite?
Oh, oh my goodness. I was only in one of the letters. There were a lot of names there. Yeah, there's a lot here.
It is a system. It's a very elaborate system.
A very elaborate system, yes. Well, maybe next time we can have an accounting report of how many were invited and what we think was the number that attended. I mean, it's...
And whether Reggie attended or
whether
not.
Reggie attended.
That's really the question.
That's what we're really looking for.
That's really the question.
I totally agree. Before we do the readings for this week, or the sketches, we want to remind everyone where we left off last episode. Last episode is Pickle resolved. Finally, the decision was made, and 2 engagements were narrowed down to 1, and they took their engagement ride. That was where things were left off.
All That Is Shiny, Titusville, Pennsylvania, September 1922. Florence wakes to two sounds, the groan emanating from her father's bed and the hallway grandfather clock chiming twice. She rises from her cot, grabs her bedside lantern, and goes into the parlor. "Papa, I'm here. Do you need a little more tincture? Let's sit up a bit and I'll get you some." Theodore Westgate looks at Florence, brow furrowed, wincing as he speaks. "Florence, dear, you go back to bed. I don't want to disturb your sleep." "Nonsense." Florence reaches for a tincture bottle, brings the light in to confirm it is the one marked morphine, squeezes, and pulls the glass dropper out half full. "Here, Papa, this should take the edge off, and if not, let me know. I will not be able to sleep a wink knowing you're in pain." Theodore closes his eyes as he absorbs the remedy dropped under his tongue. He reaches his hand out, and Florence grabs it gently. "Hey, Papa," she begins quietly. "Remember that time you surprised Marion and me and we went to Buffalo? You bought us each a new dress, and we had afternoon tea, our first ever, at the Hotel Terrain, and then spent the night so we could experience the city lights. We thought we were going downtown to eat lunch with you, and the next thing we knew, we were on the train." Theodore smiles gently, eyes still closed, and begins to drift away. Florence releases his hand, adjusts his blanket, grabs her lantern, and makes her way to the cot centered in the adjoining sunroom. She drops down, grateful all is quiet, and melts back into a deep slumber. Hours later, she wakes to the sun piercing through the multiple window panes, reflecting off rows of sterling silver, porcelain, and cut crystal. Wedding gifts on display that are now practically her bed partners. Stacks of sterling charger, dinner, and salad plates, bowls from nut to punch size, all hand-pounded from renowned local silversmith J.F. Hughes, rows of cut crystal goblets, water glasses, and sunlit porcelain plates, vases, pitchers, and colorful cookware. Florence almost gasped at the beauty of it all. Such a stark contrast from the deep mahogany darkness of the adjoining parlor and all its grim contents. Florence listens to Theodore's quiet breathing and reaches for an unopened envelope delivered in yesterday's post. It's from Shiney at Sweetbriar. "Flo, darling, such a crazy girl sleeping with your wedding presents. Sounds like you, old bug. I'm glad the first present wasn't a piano or something like that. You know, that could have been clumsy to sleep with. You are such a nut. What fun." Theodore coughs. Florence puts the letter down and pushes back her covers. "I'm coming, Papa." "Papa, it's time." Westgate home, Titusville, Pennsylvania, September 16th, 1922. Florence enters her father's sick room fully dressed in her wedding gown. Theodore Westgate is half reclined in the dark, wood-paneled parlor that has been fashioned into a convalescence room, although the days of convalescing are well behind him. Florence carefully steps around the apparatus, tincture bottles, paper piles, intent on keeping her precious dress from touching anything, and grabs her father's hand. "I've done it, Papa. We're all going to be okay. Benny is a generous man. We'll take care of everyone. Mama, Mimi, Nana, everyone. You have no worries." She leans in, kisses her father's cheek, and whispers, "I'll save your spot." I'd Rather Walk Alone, Presbyterian Church, Titusville, Pennsylvania, September 16th, 1922. The church is filled to the brim with June flowers, even though it is the beginning of September. Florence is dripping head to toe in Lily of the Valley, her favorite. Her brother Ted and her mother walk down the aisle together. The bridesmaids, all aglow in their various shades of pink tulle, accented with silver sashes, slippers, and silver leaves in their hair, follow closely, each on the arm of a groomsman. Ben stands alone at the end of the altar, smiling, pinching himself that this day has come and eagerly awaits his bride. Florence walks solemnly down the aisle, alone. Moments before, her uncle and brother each offered to escort her walk. She quietly but firmly responded, "No one will replace my father." She lifts her chin, straightens her back, and begins the solo journey towards her future. Reggie's Line, Westgate Home, September 16, 1922. The first time Florence met Reggie, which was after her divine lunch with Davy during her visit to West Point Academy, Reggie, tall, great-eyed, and handsome, walked toward her as he went by, leaned down, and whispered in her ear, "Why, you ought to have a license to look that pretty," and walked on. Florence felt a shiver, started to blush, turned towards Reggie with a smile, and realized he had walked on by. Fast forward to Florence's wedding day. The ceremony is over, and everyone gathers at the Westgate home for the reception. Everything with Ben is perfectly divine. She floats away from the cake cutting, a full champagne glass in her hand. Reggie approaches. He has hat in hand and Edith on his arm. They are not staying. As he passes Florence on his way out, he leans down and whispers in her ear and moves on. Florence stops, eyes wide open, takes a long gulp, and drains her champagne glass. Wedding trip, Titusville to D.C., September 1922. Ben and Florence stand at the platform with a mound of assorted pieces surrounding them. They are fresh aglow from their wedding day and are eager to begin their extended honeymoon, 2 weeks at the stately Greenbrier Hotel in the Virginian mountains, and then on to New York City, where they plan to light up the town in endless activity. Florence had a somber, tear-filled goodbye with her father reclined on his sickbed, who mustered all he could to assure her that he would be waiting upon her return and insisted that she have the most wonderful honeymoon ever. Florence is disappointed Mr. Jeffrey does not step out to greet them when the train pulls in, but is delighted as they tuck into the family suite together, ! And prepare for their visit to the dining car. They each enjoy a steak served on a sizzling platter and share a bottle of perfectly chilled champagne. Florence feels she is living within a dream and hopes to never wake up. The next morning, as they depart the roomette to head back to the dining car for breakfast, Mr. Jeffrey walks through their car door. He stops, stares at the unchaperoned couple, looks at the room they are exiting, smiles broadly and exclaims, "Well, you two must be married. Congratulations." The Long Ride Home, D.C. Platform, October 1922. It is a somber couple, 6 weeks later, standing on the platform in D.C., waiting the train to Titusville. It is a blue sky, crisp October day, normally the type of weather Florence would exclaim about. Instead, she leans on Ben. He wraps his arm around her, holding her close, and at the same time erect. Mr. Jeffrey greets them. As Florence steps ahead and passes Mr. Jeffrey without a word, Ben speaks softly to him. "It's Mr. Westgate. His time has come. We are hoping to get back to Titusville for a last goodbye." Florence walks into the roomette and closes the door firmly behind her. Ben stands at the door and looks at Mr. Jeffrey, unsure of what to do next. "Mr. Crawford, allow me to escort you to the bar car. Sometimes in a marriage, the best and only thing we can do is stand by. I will keep an eye on Miss Florence and will let you know when that door opens." With that, Mr. Jeffrey nods to Ben and heads to the front of the train to inform the conductor to make haste. An Unexpected Farewell, Westgate Home, Titusville, Pennsylvania, October 1922. Florence sits down on the divan, feeling the weariest her 22 years have yet known. Her mother, Louise, walks in. "I'm waving the white flag, Florence. I'm exhausted and going up. We can take care of these last details in the morning. I don't see Benjamin anywhere. Please thank him again for all he did today. He's a fine man and everyone loves him." She kisses her daughter on the forehead, gathers her wrap around her shoulders, and heads up the long staircase alone, not glancing left at the parlor which has been transformed into its original state after the long months of Theodore's decline. Florence remains in the library and looks around her. The extinguished cigars and brandy snifters, remnants of the last toast held by the independent oil barons who came to pay their respects to Theodore, the crusader who so tirelessly tried to stave off Standard Oil's ruthless monopoly, remain to be removed and can't happen soon enough for Florence's discerning nose. She stands, starts towards the mess, but stops as Ben walks quickly into the room. "Florence, my angel, sit down. I have some news to share that may shock you." Florence looks at Ben in complete disbelief. "What on earth could you possibly have to say to me tonight, of all times, to require me to sit down? Just say it." "Well, it seems someone has driven away with our car. It happened sometime after the memorial began. I parked it right in front of the house. I have notified and met with the police, and now it seems we will have to walk home." Postscript. The Crawford County judge peers down over his glasses at young Benjamin Crawford Jr. He asks him to repeat for the record what he just asked the judge. Sir, it is my request that you go lightly on these young lads. They have agreed to work off their misdeed by tending to my wife's grandmother's and great-aunt's homes in Riceville. I will oversee their work. I'd like it to be on the record that they left my car pretty much as they found it after their joyride.
Back from the sketches. Thank you, Anne. I love wedding episodes. We didn't get a ton of detail about the wedding, but we talked about it with the flowers and everything. I love that element in there. But there's a lot in these sketches that I have questions about. I mean, it's almost just chock full.
Let's go.
And I kept writing down more and more questions. First of all, this episode's called All That Is Shiny.
Yes.
And now we see from that first reading, All That Is Shiny, what it's about. But how did that come about?
It was interesting. The quote from Shiney is a direct quote from a letter. Oh, Flossie, you silly bug, sleeping with your wedding presents.
Sure.
And I thought to myself, well, why in the world would my grandmother sleep with her wedding presents?
Right.
And then realizing that her father was extremely ill and was most likely convalescing downstairs, so he did not have to deal with any steps. And so his convalescence room adjoined the sunroom, and that was the room where the wedding presents were on display. So I deducted that the only reason why she's sleeping with her wedding presents was for another reason.
She was there to be with her dad.
That was to take care of Theodore.
Right. Mm-hmm. So Theodore did not pass away before the wedding?
No, he just wasn't able to be at the wedding.
He hung in there.
He hung in there.
Got it.
And that's why she chose to walk alone.
Right.
Because he was still there in spirit, obviously. And then the reception was at the house. So
he could be there for that.
I like to think that it was a really great day for him to be reconnected with all the people he'd probably been missing and to see his daughter so happy. But sad at the same time.
Yeah,
that's that
right, it is.
Real dichotomy between...
Yeah, two major life events. Getting married and having a parent pass away. It's hard to imagine what that would have been like for her.
Another direct quote in these sketches is the picture of her walking down the aisle alone. Mm-hmm. That is a direct quote from a journal that she wrote that said, talked about her father being ill. She said, I chose to walk down the aisle alone because no one was going to take his place.
So that is really...
That's her source, yes.
Right. So you're covering fact or fiction items.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I've still got a good one to ask.
Okay, good.
But there's so many fact or fiction questions here because some of this is so remarkable. I'm like, okay, Anna's using some great creative license, but you're actually really guided by the letters.
I am.
That is beautiful. And one that I really liked that I hadn't picked on until just sitting here listening to you read was Florence talking to her dad about stories from her growing up and what things were like and just really being there with her father when he was ill. And it reminds me, quite honestly, of my father-in-law and going through that same process with everyone that surrounded him and really talking about these things and sharing these appreciations. And I think it's a really important point for families that when you get to this point, really sharing these things with each other is very important.
The wonderful memories of the surprise trip to Baltimore. And that, again, if I can say whether that's true or false, you can ask me, but I stumbled upon that detail that he did surprise them and they thought they were going to lunch. Uh-huh. And instead, they went to Baltimore so that they could have a city experience and saw their first city lights and had their first afternoon tea. So bringing those comments to Theodore's deathbed just made me feel good.
So what do we think Reggie said to Florence?
Oh, we have no idea.
Betsy, do you have a guess?
I don't, honestly.
Yeah. We don't even know that he...
I'm just surprised that he was there. I think he was there.
You really
I think he was
there? Okay.
on the list of present guests.
Coded present.
Yes.
If he was there, it does seem like he would be the type that would say something, doesn't it?
And I would be surprised that he would linger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not surprised he's the first to leave.
And I wonder what Ben thought of it.
Look what I have.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Ben won, so maybe he's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good to see you, Reg.
Although he didn't win the bobbed hair thing, so I don't know. He's not going to win everything. One of the things that I guess I do want to ask, so that segue here just briefly, and then we can come back, but let's talk about fact or historical fiction. Cue the music. It's time for fact or historical fiction. Or historical fiction. Or historical fiction. Our fact or historical fiction for this week is about this stolen car. I mean, where did that come from? The stolen car on the night of the memorial? Is that true?
That is a true story.
That is a true story? I would have guessed you made that up for some reason.
But why?
I don't know. Because it sounds kind of crazy.
Betsy, do you remember how we found that?
I don't.
So it was a newspaper article in the Titusville Herald. And it mentioned that this car was stolen at the reception. But it was also the direct quote from Ben talking to the judge.
Wow.
And saying,
that was in the newspaper.
Yeah, yes, it was in the newspaper.
That's right. So he really did want to be lenient with these young guys who
pranksters
made off with his car.
So he had a good heart, definitely.
Oh, he had a wonderful heart.
He had a really good heart.
Really good heart. Yes, I want to make that perfectly clear. He was a very kind and wonderful man, but he is a man of his times, which
right.
is the whole relationship of women and men at that time. But he was just a phenomenally good person.
I loved hearing Mr. Jeffrey come back into the mix here.
Yes.
Right? On the train trip that they took. So the wedding was on train. Everything was on train, it seems.
Yes.
And where did they go?
They went to New York and to the Greenbrier, first to the Greenbrier, which is in Virginia. It's one of the 5 grand old lady inns that go along the eastern seaboard. There's, I won't remember them all, but the Homestead, the Greenbrier, the Bell down in Florida, I think. But there is a little fact about the wedding trip story that I like to share because it was literally one of my grandmother's favorite stories to tell.
What's that?
About Mr. Jeffrey, seeing them come out of a coexisted bedroom before he knew that they were married and surmised because he knew it couldn't be anything but that. And he looked at them and he said, well, you two must be married. Congratulations.
So you really, that was almost a direct quote.
Direct quote.
Through your grandmother.
Through my grandmother.
Which is great. So oral history instead of written.
Yes. Well, she wrote it in a journal as well.
Oh, and she wrote it in a journal.
That story.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's a character here. I mean, he's a real person, but in your sketches, he is this wonderful presence throughout the entire arc of this.
He's a good man, Mr. Jeffrey.
How long was their honeymoon? It sounds like a big journey.
I think it was
6 weeks.
Right.
6 weeks?
6 weeks.
Oh, I got to do this over.
And,
wait a minute. I didn't go for 6 weeks.
And I think it might have been shortened by them having to come back home for his passing.
Because he passed away pretty quickly after the next month.
Yes.
How long were your honeymoons?
5 days.
Mine was probably a week, Betsy.
We did an overnight in Chicago.
Oh, boy. Okay, so we have quite a spectrum here, but nothing compared to this. Do you think this was common, or is this kind of given their state in life? I mean, this was kind of an unusually long...
I think that was pretty standard for people of their social class.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, it seems like Ben wasn't encumbered by having to get back to work.
Right. He was a personal investor. He was an investor. And then he was looking for jobs throughout the engagement. He would be in New York looking at a company maybe to work for. He ended up he was an attorney and he was a banker. So he did work. But at that time, he was in between, I guess.
Did he go to
work.
college prior to the wedding or after?
He went to Princeton and went to war and came back and went to Princeton, just like Ted.
Just like Ted.
And then he, as an older adult, went to law school.
At University of Virginia?
Correct.
I've asked about you knowing your grandparents when you were younger until they passed away. When did your grandfather pass away?
He was 79 years old. I was 20.
Your grandmother lived longer than that, right?
She lived about 10 years longer. Yeah, I was very close with my grandparents. I was actually with my grandfather when he passed.
Speaking of Ted, I found out what seems to be that he went to Princeton for only 2 years. So similarly to Flo, who went to college for 2 years, Ted went for 2 years.
So did he go before and then go to war and come back and then leave?
I don't know. I need to figure out that timeline.
But tell us what else you discovered. I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, so once again, I'm using my Ancestry.com membership, which has just been tremendous. And I took a look at Ted's history, and Ancestry.com gives you access to various lists, so to speak, databases, voter registration, census records, military records. They also link up with newspapers.com that gives you access to newspaper articles that have been digitized. So anyway, I found out that Ted moved to California, Los Angeles area, and I went through different decades because census records are only by the decade, and discovered on one record, sometimes Ancestry.com will transcribe the information to their database, and sometimes they get it wrong. And so this was, I believe, the 1950 census. He lived on Millbark Street in Los Angeles, and his occupation was listed as tree, as in the word tree, T-R-E-E, Landskaviter. And I thought to myself, what in the world is that? It sounds Norwegian or something. Like maybe he has a specialty in taking care of trees or something. So I went to the original document and read it for myself. And what they didn't get right was that he was a freelance writer for stage and radio, which is really cool because his mother is a writer.
It runs
Flo
in the family.
was a writer.
Yes.
He's a writer.
Right. The thread it continues, and it went, sideways as well.
Mother, son, daughter. Yeah. That's great.
Granddaughter.
And then the other fun thing.
And sorry, Ann.
No, that's right.
That's right. She's sitting right here.
The other fun thing is, as a researcher, is that I can find where he lived, and then I can look up this house on Zillow or another website and actually see the house and determine when that house was built, and then verify, yes, this is the actual house that he occupied. So,
have you done that then?
I
with this?
have.
And
yes.
Is it still
Beautiful.
standing?
Yes.
Yeah.
They moved around a bit, so there are a few different homes that you can still take a look at online.
One's for sale, if you're interested.
Well, Los Angeles, not right now.
You.
It's a long, long way away. Continuing a little bit with Mr. Jeffrey, I'm so intrigued by that. And have you been doing more research into the Pullman porters?
We have. It's a really interesting history, and I'm hoping that we can talk about that a little bit more next time after I do some more research.
That'd be great.
We're very excited about visiting the Pullman Museum in Chicago when it reopens. There's a whole glimpse of life there that is historically interesting. And the Pullman Porter trade union that they had to fight to build because they weren't allowed to be part of the regular train union. It was a huge deal. So there's lots of good tidbits about what life would be like as Mr. Jeffrey.
They were called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, was the name of the union. And there's an area, a named neighborhood in Chicago called Pullman, where it was a constructed community for people who worked on the Pullman cars.
Sort of like the mill houses where we live, where there was a mill. The houses were built. And we will be visiting that neighborhood too when we go to the museum.
Well, I really look forward to that because I'm very drawn to that particular character. Next time, as we start setting our sights to next week, or the next episode, let's say, we're going to start to get some glimpses into married life, I think, is what we get to look forward to next time. Some of the trials and tribulations of married life.
Yeah, we'll just say it's smoking hot.
It's smoking hot. I like that. Well, please join us next time, and thanks again for listening. And thanks for being here.
Always glad to meet at the wall.
Betsy.
It's always a good time. Thanks so much.
Meet Me at the Wall is hosted by Doug Martinet, Ann Goodwin, and Betsy Schmeeken. Music is written and performed by Alex Vance. This podcast is copyright 2025 by Pleasurable Pause Press. Thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in again next time.